The sun had just started to rise when people began getting on Flight 788 from Los Angeles to New York. Most people were sleepy. Some were business people flying back after a busy week full of meetings. Others were regular folks, holding coffee cups in one hand and soft travel pillows in the other. No one had cameras. There were no loud reporters. Just the soft sounds of people showing their boarding passes, the wheels of suitcases rolling on the carpet, and the kind voice of flight attendants helping people walk into the plane. Among the first people to board was a tall man. He wore a charcoal-colored jacket and walked quietly with calm confidence. His name was Keanu Reeves. He didn't act like a famous person. He didn't ask for special treatment. He just had a small black backpack and a book tucked under one arm. He sat in a first-class seat, not because he thought he was better than others, but because his assistant had told him, "It's a long flight, Keanu. Please, no middle seats this time." But Keanu didn't believe that sitting in a big, comfy seat made anyone more special. And what happened next showed exactly why he thought that way. Not long after Keanu sat in seat 2A, another person walked into the plane. He was older, moved a little slower, but had a strong presence. People didn't need to be told who he was. It was Clint Eastwood. He wore a plain jacket and a fedora hat pulled low. Even though he was older now, he still looked strong and calm, like someone who didn't need to shout to be heard. Clint looked at his ticket. It said 2B, the seat next to Keanu. But when he got there, a flight attendant, a young lady dressed perfectly, looked confused. She saw Clint's ticket and said politely, "Sir, I think there's a mistake. This is a first-class seat. You might be in the wrong section." Clint looked at her calmly. "That's what it says here, 2B, he said kindly. The flight attendant leaned in, looking closely at the ticket again. Then she smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the kind of smile people give when they think you don't belong somewhere. She said, "This seat is already taken. You'll need to speak with the gate agent." Clint didn't get mad. He didn't complain. He just nodded slowly and said, "Sure. No trouble." And he turned to leave. But before he could go, Keanu stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. He just stood there calmly and said to the flight attendant, "He's in the right seat." The flight attendant blinked. "Sir, I'm not sure." "I am," Keanu said, still calm. "That's Clint Eastwood. He belongs wherever he sits." Now the flight attendant's face changed. She realized who Clint was. But it was too late. Some people had already noticed the moment. The calm, sleepy mood of the cabin had changed. Still, Keanu wasn't done. He picked up his backpack and said, "If there's any confusion, I'll take his seat instead." Even Clint was surprised. "There's no need for that," he said gently. "I know," Keanu replied with a soft smile. "But respect shouldn't need a barcode." The flight attendant stood there for a second, unsure what to do. Then she nodded and said, "Let me check with the crew." As she left, Clint looked at Keanu with a small smile. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I didn't do it for you," Keanu said, still smiling. "I did it for what you stand for." Clint took his seat. Keanu sat beside him. The rest of the passengers boarded. No cameras filmed it. No videos were taken. But something special happened in that quiet moment. Something stronger than noise. Something that didn't need words. Later, Clint leaned a little closer and said, "You know, I've seen people fight for attention all their lives. But the ones who really matter, they don't need to be noticed." Keanu nodded. "I just didn't want them to forget who they were talking to." Then they both stayed quiet for a long time. In seats 2A and 2B, two legends sat, not fighting for fame, not trying to be better than each other, but just sitting together with quiet respect. It reminded people that being humble is not being weak. and that stepping in at the right time, even silently, can change everything. As the plane flew through the night sky, the cabin was filled with something strong, not noise, but honor. The plane landed in New York just past midnight. Most people got off the plane slowly, stretching and checking their phones. The first-class cabin emptied fast. Except for two men, Keanu Reeves and Clint Eastwood. They stood at the end of the aisle, next to each other, not saying anything, but peaceful. There were no reporters. No fans. Just two men walking quietly. But they didn't know something big had already started. 3 rows behind them, a young girl had seen everything. She was about 17 years old. Her name was Leela. She was flying with her dad to New York for his job. It was a surprise trip, and she had to miss school. She was sitting by the window, listening to music, curled up under a blanket. But when the flight attendant spoke to Clint, when her voice changed to a meaner tone, Leela noticed. And when Keanu stood up, when he offered his seat without making a scene, she noticed that too. In a world where grown-ups often shout to get their way, Leela saw 2 men who didn't need to shout. They just stood tall with kindness. That night in her hotel, Leela couldn't sleep. So she took out her journal, a notebook full of thoughts she never showed anyone. She wrote about what she saw. The last thing she wrote was, "I didn't know dignity could be quiet, until tonight." Then she did something small. She took a picture of the page and posted it to her private social media. She didn't use any hashtags. No tags. Just a simple caption. "This happened tonight. Keanu Reeves and Clint Eastwood on my flight. Respect looks like this." 12 hours later, someone took a screenshot of her post. Then someone else shared it. Then a small fan page for Keanu saw it. By the next day, thousands of people had seen it. But the comments weren't full of gossip. People didn't talk about movies. They talked about kindness. About how respect matters. About how even small things can touch the heart. More stories came in. People wrote about seeing kindness at airports. About how someone helped them carry bags. About how tone, the way we say things, can change everything. Then came news pages, blogs, airplane forums, and more. But the story didn't go viral because Keanu was famous or Clint was a legend. It spread because of how it made people feel. A soft warmth. A happy ache. A reminder that quiet courage is powerful. Keanu didn't know at first. He spent the day walking through New York. He didn't check his phone. He didn't care about being famous. He ate lunch at a small cafe. Gave his leftover food to a man on the street. Didn't say a word. That night, his assistant called him laughing. "You've gone viral again," she said. "This time, for being decent." Keanu smiled. "That's the kind of viral I can live with." Clint found out too, not from the news, but from his granddaughter. She sent him a message with a heart emoji and a link to the story. Clint chuckled. "They sure do love you, Keanu." But the story didn't stop there. It started something even bigger. Airline workers from different places began writing in. Some said it's hard when you're told to follow rules, but your heart says something else. One worker wrote, "I've never been sure how to choose respect when the seating chart says no." Old flight attendants shared stories too. One said, "I served Clint in the 90s. He was so kind. He just wanted tea and a soft seat." Another wrote, "I met Keanu once in the back of a plane. He helped an old lady with her tray. Then asked us, the crew, if we were okay." That's who he is. That's when the story became more than just 2 men. It became a story about who we are when no one's watching. Soon, airlines started quietly changing their training. They didn't make big announcements. But inside, they started teaching crew members to use not just rules, but also kindness and judgment. One airline even made a new training scene called the Eastwood flight. They asked, "How do we follow rules and still show respect?" Meanwhile, Keanu kept walking. He didn't do interviews. When a news station asked for a quote, his publicist said, "Mr. Reeves believes the moment speaks for itself." And it did. The real change was quiet, deep. At dinner tables, dads told sons what it means to stand up for someone. In schools, teachers used the story to talk about courage. In Michigan, a therapist told teens, "Empathy isn't just a feeling. It's an action." And Leela, the girl who wrote in her journal, got invited to read her story at her school's year-end assembly. She finished by saying, "Sometimes, the best way to change the world is to make sure one person isn't disrespected when no one else is watching. And if someone is watching, even better." And far away, in a quiet hotel room, Keanu Reeves sat by a window. The lights of the city twinkled outside. He had no idea that a simple sentence, spoken kindly and without a script, had traveled all around the world. And changed it, just a little, for the better. By the end of the week, Keanu Reeves' face was everywhere again, but this time it wasn't because of a new film, a press tour, or some viral stunt. His name spread not through excitement or attention-grabbing headlines, but because of something simple, quiet, and unexpected. It all started with a small moment on an airplane that hadn't been planned or created for publicity. It began when Keanu kindly gave up his seat to an elderly man in first class. The flight attendant noticed this simple act of respect, and from there, the story slowly traveled to the world. The story wasn't about fame or trying to be noticed. It was about doing something right in a quiet way. The news spread, and it touched the hearts of people everywhere. Stories of kindness began pouring in from all over the world, from places like Melbourne to Manchester. People shared their own stories about times they had been treated unfairly or moments when they had done something kind, even if it was something small. The story about Keanu wasn't just about him. It reminded people that they, too, could choose kindness, even when no one was watching. It was a reminder that kindness still mattered in a noisy world where people were often only focused on big, loud moments. With all the attention came requests for Keanu to speak at events, help with causes, and show up for organizations. At first, the requests were small. They came from non-profits, schools, and even diversity groups. Soon, the number of invitations grew, and Keanu's assistant found it hard to keep up with all the emails and letters. There were so many. Some organizations wanted him to be their ambassador, others invited him to speak at conferences. There was one invitation from a school district in Maine asking if he would talk to high school students about kindness and respect. Another letter came from a major human rights group, asking if he would be their global ambassador. There was even one from an airline inviting him to deliver a keynote speech about compassion in the workplace. Keanu read every letter carefully. He wasn't looking for the biggest or most well-known cause. He just wanted to understand the people who were reaching out to him. He knew that each letter came from someone who had been inspired by the moment on the airplane and believed in the message of kindness that he had shared. But Keanu didn't immediately say yes to any of the requests. Instead, he spent time walking around quiet streets in Brooklyn, taking peaceful walks through parks, and thinking about what was best. Keanu had been famous for a long time, but that didn't mean he wanted to be treated as if he was above everyone else. In fact, he had spent a lot of time learning how to handle fame in a humble way. He wanted to be able to think clearly, away from all the noise of the world. One evening, Keanu spoke to an old friend about the pressure he felt. "It's not that I don't want to help," he said. "But if people think I'm doing something just to get attention, the real message is lost. It's not about me, it's about what really matters." His friend nodded and said, "But what if people see what's possible? What if it becomes about what you can inspire in others?" That question stuck with Keanu. It wasn't a big, grand question, but it was a true one. The next day, Keanu responded to one of the letters, but it wasn't the biggest or most influential one. Instead, it was a letter from a public school in Newark. The students, teachers, and staff had written a letter together. They explained how Keanu's quiet act of kindness had started something at their school. The kids were talking more about respect, the teachers were thinking differently about how to handle conflict, and one student wrote, "You made me feel like someone still cares about how we treat each other, even if no one is watching." Keanu agreed to visit the school. He didn't want any cameras or big announcements. He just wanted to spend a quiet morning with the students. When he arrived, there were no reporters or photographers. Instead, there were 15 teenagers who had seen the video and read the story. Some of them had experienced moments when they were treated unfairly. Others had seen their parents being treated badly. Keanu didn't lecture them or try to teach them a lesson. He just listened. When he finally spoke, he said, "If you ever see someone being treated unfairly, don't wait for someone else to fix it. Sometimes it's enough to say, 'That's not okay.'" One teacher cried in the back of the room. She wasn't crying because it was dramatic. She was crying because, for the first time, it felt like someone was teaching them how to treat each other with respect. After that visit, Keanu didn't sign up for a big campaign or join a charity. Instead, he continued to quietly show up at local community events. He went to meetings about inclusion, education, and kindness, sitting in the back row with just a notebook and a cup of coffee. There were no cameras, no speeches, just his presence. And in every place he went, people began to be more honest. They stopped trying to impress each other and just started talking from the heart. Soon, a journalist started calling this quiet, powerful effect the Reeves effect. It wasn't because Keanu was trying to lead a movement. It was because he reminded people of the power of simple kindness. But not everyone understood this quiet approach. As Keanu's story grew, some people started criticizing him. They said that kindness wasn't enough. They said he was romanticizing the idea of avoiding conflict and not facing real problems. Some even called him an icon of passivity, suggesting that being nice wasn't real leadership. At first, Keanu ignored the criticism. He wasn't concerned about fighting back or getting into arguments. He just stayed true to who he was and kept doing what he believed in. He continued to live humbly, not trying to prove anything to anyone. One day, at a leadership conference in Austin, Texas, there was a discussion about the ethics of influence. The panel was filled with business leaders, marketing experts, and CEOs. During the discussion, one of the speakers suddenly turned toward the audience and said, "And then we have this idea that influence is just about being nice. Like Keanu Reeves, being polite on an airplane makes him some kind of leader. But that's not leadership. That's just a moment." Keanu was sitting in the audience, but he didn't get upset. He didn't try to defend himself or argue. He just leaned forward, quietly reminding everyone that real leadership isn't about performance or trying to impress others. It's about being present and true to your values. After the session, Keanu stepped outside to sit on a stone ledge near a sculpture garden. A few students from a local university recognized him and hesitated nearby. One student, a young woman with a sketchbook, came up to him and said, "Sorry, what that guy said in there wasn't fair." Keanu looked up at her and smiled. He didn't think it was unfair. He said, "It's okay. He's questioning whether kindness is enough, and that's a valid question. Kindness isn't always enough, but it's a place to start." The student thought about this and later wrote about it in a blog post that quietly went viral. Keanu understood something that not many others did. Real change doesn't look heroic or exciting. It looks like listening when you want to speak. It looks like choosing not to humiliate someone, even if you could. It looks like standing up for what's right without trying to make a spectacle of it. In a world that craves loud and dramatic actions, this quiet way of doing things was hard to understand. But Keanu knew that real influence didn't come from being the loudest person in the room. It came from showing up quietly and being true to yourself. Back in Los Angeles, The story of Keanu's kind act on the airplane continued to spread. Even Clint Eastwood, a famous actor, was asked about it. He gave a rare statement, saying, "What Keanu did was nothing, and that's the whole point. It was small, but it was honest. That's what we need more of, honest moments." This statement made people stop and think. It reminded everyone that Keanu wasn't trying to be a hero. He had simply done the right thing in a quiet way. Keanu didn't respond to all the praise. He didn't try to make a big deal out of it. Instead, he continued doing what he always did. Walking, helping others when he could, and showing up for people in need. He kept visiting schools, sitting in on community meetings, and encouraging others to be kind. People all over the world kept telling the story of what Keanu had done, not because he was famous, but because his kindness reminded them that respect doesn't need to be loud to be real. And even though the story eventually faded from the headlines, Keanu remained the same. He was the man who simply offered his seat because it was the right thing to do. And that quiet act of kindness continued to inspire people long after the noise of the world had moved on. When someone was told they didn't belong, they tried to buy it. But the thing about stories is that when they go far enough, someone always tries to take control of them. It doesn't matter where the story started or if it wasn't planned. Once a story reaches a lot of people, companies start to try to make money from it. They don't care about what the story really means. They just see how they can make money from it. After the story about the flight started to spread, Keanu Reeves started getting offers from different companies. These offers were nice, but they also made him feel uncomfortable. It wasn't because the people who offered were bad, but because these companies didn't understand that not everything beautiful should be turned into a product. The first offer was from a fancy airline. They wanted Keanu and Clint Eastwood to act in a commercial. They showed a picture of Keanu helping client with his coat and smiling. They wanted the slogan to say, "First class is character." They even offered him a lot of money and told him he could make the ad however he wanted. Then, a tech company asked if they could make a robot that talks like Keanu. They thought people trusted him and wanted to make a robot that could talk kindly. Keanu just smiled, but inside, he thought, programmable trust? He didn't like the idea. Next, a drink company asked him to help them make a special drink. They said part of the money would go to charity. They also promised a lot of money and global fame. But Keanu saw that each offer wanted to turn the special moment on the plane into a product. They wanted to take something beautiful and turn it into something to sell. Keanu didn't feel angry. He just felt disappointed. Not in the people offering the deals, but in the world that thought everything had to be for sale. One day, Keanu went to his favorite bookstore in Pasadena. It was old and quiet, with books everywhere and the floor that creaks when you walked. He sat by a rainy window and read Letters to a Young Poet. Later, he wrote a letter. Not to the companies who offered him things, but to the public. He didn't post it on social media. He didn't even have social media. Instead, the letter was shared by a small non-profit newsletter that focused on storytelling and honesty. A few thousand people read it, and they shared it with others. The letter said, "What happened on that flight was never mine to sell. It was just a moment when I made a choice. Anyone could have made that choice. The fact that it became a story says more about the world than about me. I didn't complain or post about it. Someone else noticed it, and that's how stories work. We notice each other, and we let them grow naturally. I'm grateful that this story grew, but I won't trade it for anything. It's already given me more than any contract could." The letter was shared over 1 million times in just 2 days. This time, it wasn't edited or changed. It was just Keanu's words, and they were shared by people who cared about stories and doing things the right way. Clint Eastwood even called him a few nights later, not to congratulate him, but just to say one thing, "You were right not to sell it." Keanu smiled and said, "I wasn't sure at first." Clint laughed and said, That's how you know it mattered. Meanwhile, the world moved on, like it always does when it can't own something. But some people didn't forget. A teacher in Denver wrote to Keanu and said her students were still doing their decency diaries every Friday. The nonprofit that shared Keanu's letter started getting more money from people who believed in it. Even the young flight attendant who had been on the plane with him reached out privately. She said, "I've been rethinking a lot since that day. Thank you for not making me a villain." Keanu wrote back and said, "You were never the villain." That moment on the plane wasn't a performance. It was just a pause, a moment of clarity in a world that often moves too fast. Because Keanu chose not to sell that moment, it stayed pure. It wasn't changed by money or big companies. It stayed true to what it meant. The flight wasn't special. It wasn't filled with reporters or people whispering his name. It was just another flight on a normal Tuesday in San Francisco. Keanu had bought his own ticket, just like he always did. No fancy treatment. Just a book in his hand and a duffel bag on his shoulder. The woman at the gate didn't recognize him at first, but when she did, her eyes went wide. Keanu just smiled and said, "Don't worry, I'm just here to fly." The flight was short, but something happened on it. An older man, maybe in his 70s, boarded the plane late. He moved slowly, his hand shaking a little as he reached for his boarding pass. The attendant helped him find his seat, which was the same as Keanu's seat on the other flight. But this time, there was no argument. There was just a woman sitting in the seat, and she wasn't happy when she realized there was a mix-up. Keanu saw what was happening. He saw the older man feel nervous and confused. So, he stood up and went over to the man. He quietly asked, "Sir, would you like to take my seat instead? I don't mind moving." The man looked at him and said, "You're him from that story." Keanu smiled and said, "From a few of them." The old man didn't want to take the seat, but Keanu said, "I can tell when someone's tired." The woman in the seat now realized who Keanu was. She apologized and moved to another seat. Keanu went to the back of the plane and sat down in the coach, just like anyone else. No one clapped or filmed, but something felt right in the air. After the flight, the old man stopped by Keanu's seat before getting off the plane. He said, "It wasn't just that flight, you know. You've done this more times than anyone's seen." Keanu didn't answer. He just smiled, because he didn't need the world to remember him. He just hoped people would remember what he stood for. When Keanu left the plane in Vancouver, the cool breeze hit him like it always did. As he walked through the terminal, he passed a row of newspaper stands. One paper caught his eye. It was about a school in a small town in Maine that had started a campaign called Seats of Honor. The students were encouraged to give up something for someone who needed it more. The idea came from a girl named Maya, who had written an essay. Keanu bought the paper and folded it into his coat pocket. He walked out into the world, feeling like maybe, just maybe, it had shifted a little more toward kindness. Not because of a big speech or a brand, but because one man had quietly stood up twice, and in doing so, reminded the world that our greatest strength is to stay human in a world that often asks us to forget. If you liked this story, tell me in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more fun adventures and mysteries. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.